Welcome to tonight's edition of Resourc PNG. Over the past decade, PNG's economy has been robust, averaging a 7% growth annually. However, growth has not been inclusive and the country remains off track to achieve the Millennium Development Goals by 2015. Papua New Guinea ranks 137th out of 169 countries on the 2010 Human Development Index, HDI, with persistent levels of poverty and social inequality. The United Nations Development Programme is therefore embarking on producing the National Human Development Report in partnership with the Government of Papua New Guinea. We join Martin Numerong in an interview with UNDP Resident Representative David McLaughlin-Carr.
Countries rich in natural resources have been known to suffer from what is referred to as the resources curse. The United Nations Development Programme, which you had, and you're also the country manager for UN, is working with the government of Papua New Guinea on what is referred to as the National Human Development Report. Could you give us some background about how UNDP got involved with the government in developing the National Human Development Report?
Yeah, thank you, Martin. I think the single biggest issue facing the economic development of Papua New Guinea and social development is around the use of extractive industries and the windfall from natural resources, that the impact it will have on the economy in this country and how it will be translated into human development. Given this fact that there are a number of extremely large resource projects coming online at this particular moment, we've been engaged as the UN's development program in a number of discussions with the government of Papua New Guinea around the whole issue of utilising the extractive industries for human development. One of the genesis of this project and one of the key elements is the engagement of the Chief Secretary and the Prime Minister's office, who has agreed to be co-chair of a steering committee for the production of a National Human Development Report for Papua New Guinea, specifically on the subject of the resources boom, translating the wealth from extractive industries into growing the economy and sustainable human development.
And one of the things that comes out from the report that is being developed is the issue of inclusiveness and sustainability. How will the report address those key themes regarding the distribution of natural resource wealth in Papua New Guinea?
You make a good point. I mean, human development, in order to be sustainable, has to be inclusive. That is, it needs to grow the economy and involve all Papua New Guineans in the development of the country. What has been seen in Papua New Guinea is that extractive industries is not a new thing. There's been large mining projects happening in Papua New Guinea for 40 years, and yet the net impact of those projects in not all cases has had a positive impact, either on improving human development indicators in the country or on the populations directly affected by those projects. What the National Human Development Report purports to do is to provide an in-depth analysis of the experience of extractives in Papua New Guinea, but also to provide policy options to governments about some of the best practices that have been employed globally, about countries that have successfully managed to use the windfall from extractive industries for sustainable and inclusive growth of their populations. So the project itself will look at those aspects about how do you utilise non-renewable extractive industries to grow economy around the renewable resources which this country has, such as agriculture, such as fisheries, such as forests, which of course employ the majority of the population. So the idea of inclusiveness is to ensure that the windfall is actually evenly spread so that the rest of the economy can grow and more Papua New Guineans are actually brought into the
other development partners are also involved in some form of advising to the government regarding natural resources. For example, also it has the Mining for Development program. What makes this UNDP program unique or different from the programs that are being implemented by other development partners in Papua New Guinea?
United Nations Development Program is a global resource that has been working in developing countries for more than 40 years. what we can bring is a knowledge bank of global best practices that has been derived from countries from this region to Africa to South America. And many of the economies that we've been working in as a development program have experienced resources booms. There have been good examples of best practices of how governments have managed the windfall to grow the economy, and then there have been some other practices which perhaps have been less successful. What we do and what we can bring to Papua New Guinea is, of course, this global perspective on the new and emerging knowledge about how governments can look at using the windfall extractives to grow the economy. And that, I think, is our comparative advantage, that we have a global perspective as a multilateral organisation, and that we can actually bring to this country, as I said, a smorgasbord of best practices that have been developed around the world.
We continue with this interview when we return. Welcome back. We continue the interview with UNDP resident representative David McLaughlin-Carr.
Now, the obvious issue that arises is that the smorgasbord of technical and theoretical information that you will be bringing to support the report, would it be contextualized so that it may be relevant to the PNG context? And how do you intend to address that in the report?
Absolutely. The report will also have a historical perspective about the impact of extractive industries in Papua New Guinea over the last 40 years. So we'll be looking at some of the good outcomes and some of the less good outcomes. So I think we need to make a frank assessment about some of the past experiences that Papua New Guinea has had with this, good and bad. But we also need, I think, to look at the unique context of Papua New Guinea. This is a country that's very rich in resources, has a growing population, but we also need to accept the fact that extractive industries only employ a small percentage of the population. The vast majority of Papua New Guineans, 85%, live on the land and have not only access, but are actually landowners themselves. This is quite unique in the global context, to have landowners who actually control their own resources. So we'll be focusing very much on not only the rural aspect that needs to be addressed, but we'll also be looking at the cultural context of Papua New Guinea and how some of these global best practices can be adapted to the cultural context of the unique cultural context that is Papua New Guinea, and that is a large population of landowners who have unique prospects as drivers of the economy. If the catalytic effect of the income that's derived from non-renewable extractives can then be translated into growing their own economy for renewable activities such as agriculture, fisheries, and
the UNDP is producing this report at a time when the LNG project revenues are coming. Was there any thinking around LNG revenues and the release of or the production of this human development report? And what do you hope? What lessons do you hope that the government and the people of Papua New Guinea can learn and not repeat when the LNG revenues come on stream?
No, absolutely. I mean, I arrived in Papua New Guinea in 2009, just as the initial phase of the LNG project was starting. Obviously, the catalytic effect of the single biggest resource project starting in Papua New Guinea, multi-billion-dollar investment in LNG, means that there's huge opportunities for Papua New Guinea at this particular moment. It's crucial, however, that the government look at policy options to get it right, to make sure that as I said, the windfall from extractives does translate into real grassroots development. It's encouraging to see that the government's talking about investing in people, investing in the grassroots, increasing budgets for health and education. I think unless those happen in tandem, there's a danger that some of the mistakes of the past could rise again, where basically you have money coming into the country, but it's not being actually used adequately to address the needs of people, particularly around their education needs and their health needs. So in a way, it's a unique opportunity to present to the government at the moment some of the thinking around how that the government can best utilise the catalytic effect of non-renewable resources to grow the economy. At the same time, the government is actually starting to look at making sure that there's a trickle-down effect from these resources, which will get to the grassroots. I think there's no time to lose. There's projects coming on board. The full production, I believe, will start towards the end of next year, and it's time for policymakers, I think, to examine those options carefully to make sure that in future budgetary deliberations, but also in the formulation of the next medium-term development plan, that there is appropriate planning and strategies and policies put in place that will ensure that the windfall will translate into economic growth across the board.
So in that sense, does this report provide a descriptive overview of the non-renewable extractive industry sector, as well as the, if you like, prescriptions, or are we going to try to avoid prescribing things to the government?
It provides options. It provides options to government, but I think, as I've mentioned earlier, one of the benefits that it can is to provide this global perspective and give policymakers options about how do you get the balance right between prudent fiscal management, that is, making sure that the windfall is actually soundly managed, and at the same time ensuring that money is invested in people, in human development. That balance is not easy for any government. Around the world, governments are challenged, but also wrestling constantly with this balance.
But is the balance achievable?
It is achievable. It is achievable. It is achievable. I think in the context of Papua New Guinea, there is a need for a massive injection of investment in the health sector and the education sector. If that is done wisely and it's done in a targeted manner, and as I said, the government's policy of decentralising through the DSIP funds a lot of the assistance that comes from the budget to the provinces and to the districts is the right way to go about it. But you also must make sure in place that there's appropriate monitoring and accountability around the use of those resources. And we'll also be arguing in this report that some of the options for government is to join on to the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, but also perhaps to move forward on the establishment of the Independent Commission of Anti-Corruption, of which there will be a public consultation starting almost immediately. And I think that if they go hand in hand, so the question of good governance around the use of extractives, good increase in social spending, and of course prudent fiscal management of the funds, then you've got a winning combination.
Mr. McLaughlin-Carr, thank you for joining us on Resource PNG.
You're welcome.
Stay tuned for more after the break. You're back with Resource PNG. In this segment, we talk to Massey University Associate Professor Glenn Banks, who is working in close collaboration with the Department of National Planning and Monitoring to compile a report that will provide a descriptive analysis of the current management of resource rents and prescribe global best practices in the PNG context. It is hoped that the body of knowledge contained in the report will inform policymakers as to how Papua New Guinea's natural resource policies are socially inclusive and environmentally sustainable.
Dr. Banks, thank you for joining us on Resource PNG.
Thank you for having me.
Could you give us an overview of what are some key features of the report that you would be writing about?
One of the key things relates to the notion of the resource curse, this idea that countries that have significant amounts of natural resources, that are heavily dependent on natural resources for their growth, tend to exhibit lower rates of economic growth than countries that are less dependent on natural resources.
Now, why is that the case, that countries that are dependent on extractive industries have lower growth rates?
The evidence seems to point towards the effects on the economy. So there are effects of a heavy reliance on exports appreciating the value of a currency, which means that other sectors of the economy become less viable. and less competitive than the resources sector. There's also concerns around governance and the way in which resource revenues, when they flow to a central government, can actually destabilise and undermine the capacity of government to deliver goods and services to its population.
It's not as clear-cut, is it? Because there are services, the service industry, for example, benefits when there is a resource boom. In, for example, the mining sector, you have the development of specialist skills that can be used in other parts of the economy. So how are you going to deal with those different nuances when you're writing your report?
I think that's it. I think in the report we have to bring out some of those nuances and say at the global, broad, general level, you can talk about a resource curse, but when you start to pull it apart and look at particular countries, you'll see that even here in Papua New Guinea, there have been some positive benefits over the last 40 years in terms of improving health and education and right across the country generally, particularly in some provinces as well. So it's a matter of teasing apart some of the complexity around that.
And obviously, in order for you to tease apart, you're going to have access to data. How easy or difficult is it for you to have access to data that you require to write a report?
It's easy to have access to the data that exists. We have UNDP have a very good relationship with planning, for example, Department of Planning and National Planning and Management. The concern is how much data there actually is in the first place, and that's something that we're going to be exploring over the next few weeks in terms of what data we have access to and what we can actually use to build a much more comprehensive picture of human development here in Papua New Guinea.
Now, the report is specifically focused on being environmentally sustainable and socially inclusive. What sort of data would you require to draw a conclusion?
We're going to be very interested in looking at environmental practices, environmental management of the major resource companies and the impacts that their operations have on the environment and on people's livelihoods that are connected to the environment. In terms of being socially inclusive, that really comes down to some questions of the way in which resource rents have been used in the past. And so to what extent have the resource rents that the government received, how have they been translated into improved access to health and to education, to infrastructure right across the country? So looking at the way in which, tracing the flows really in terms of the flow of money from the resources to the central government and then seeing how that is used and spread to health and education.
Now, in terms of the unique system in Papua New Guinea of customary land tenure, resource rent obviously ends up directly into the hands of customary landowners. How are you going to look into the movement of money? If you can recall, there was a recent report by the National Research Institute into Porgera, which found some opacities, and how will you get around that to write your report?
I think that's an element of it, and that may well be one of the things that we propose towards the end of the report is a need for greater transparency, particularly at provincial and local levels when it comes to the way in which resource rents are used. But I think too, you can have a look at, there is data, for example, on health and education around some of these large mining operations. So you can see the way in which, on Lihir, for example, there have been real substantive improvements in access to education and education outcomes and in measures of health such as life expectancy. So there is data on those elements.
Now, recently the head of the ADB visited Papua New Guinea and he called on the government to be focused on creating a more inclusive, integrated and innovative country. Now, in terms of the resource curse and how it has effect on some traditional economic sectors, and how it perhaps kills innovation in those sectors by, for example, the Dutch disease effect. What sort of global best practices will you be looking at, and how they might be appropriate to the PNG context?
I think this is going to be interesting to explore. Like you say, it's that connection between the global ideas, the global lessons, and contextualising those into the particular situation that we have here in Papua New Guinea. So it's not going to be it's not going to be a straightforward translation of taking ideas from outside and applying them here in Papua New Guinea, but looking at the ways in which there have been innovations. There have been innovations around, for example, landowner companies from the major resource projects. Even something like the Development Forum and some of the BSAs that have been developed. Those are world-leading innovations in terms of getting community buy-in to the way in which mining companies, oil companies relate to the communities that they're operating in.
We'll be back with more after the break. Thanks for staying with us on the show. In this next segment, we join the Minister for Treasury, Don Paulier, to talk about the tax contributed by Octedi and Oil Search and why other major mines are not big taxpayers.
I've seen Prime Minister Peter O'Neill working and consulting and liaising with developers, with miners that are coming in. If they come in, I've seen the Prime Minister welcoming them, visiting them, giving them around on Papua New Guinea and embracing them with the initiatives that they have. And I've seen other ministers doing that. I do that myself, and we are setting the standard there, and we hope that we continue to forge the strength of partnership with the resource sector, so we grow, and we create a win-win. That one doesn't overlooks the rights of the other, but we all maximize our gains.
Minister, Octedi and Oil Search are the biggest contributors from that industry to the national budget at the moment. How important are their taxes that they pay?
Oh, they're very important. Octedi is very important to the state's coffers. Octedi has been very strong revenue base for the country. They pay to the country in a significant way. It forms a major part of our budget, whilst 63% of revenue goes to PNG Sustainable Development. The state, it says, shares a remarkable. Also does pay to the state's dividend. And the revenues that the state is entitled to. And I commend both Octedi Mines and Oil Search for doing. But I also understand that they have some outstanding payments yet to be made, and they'll be paying that. The other projects that the state has an interest in, or in the areas of tax, corporate or company tax that they need to pay. I also see that these companies and these operators will also need to pay to the state what they owe. Because like I've said, we would like to see transparency. We want to be as transparent as much as possible. And I'm driving that myself. I thank the Prime Minister O'Neill and the Cabinet for approving this EITI, and I'm driving that. And I like to see companies pay up what they must pay. I've also started a audit training program where I'm engaging World Bank, I'm engaging OSAID, and even private people who can train our men and women in the Internal Revenue Commission under the leadership of Betty Palazzo. You can also train customs under the leadership of Ray Paul, to train our people and impart to them the skills necessary for them to go out there and do audit of the mining industries, the proceeds that come into the country as a result of the mining business. We'd like to also see that done in the petroleum sector, so that we would like to tell the people and say, this is how much is collected, and that's how much is due to the state and due to the people. So I'm doing those. And those projects that have not done so well in paying revenues entitled to the state and have not operated very well, like for instance, Tolokuma Mine, I like to urge them to improve the management, cut down the costs in the operational structure, minimize in the administration and operational cost of the operations, and maximizing the profitability. They've got to apply new methods of managing their businesses. And I'm seeing that happening in the future, because like I've said, the tax review is ongoing. I'm targeting that area. I'm also doing audit, a program for the mining industry, and then I'll move to the petroleum sector. So I improve the fiscal aspect of those projects, and we're training our people to become expert at that. And I'm driving also the extractive industry transparency initiative. I've already established the working committee, an interim one. I've also established the interim secretariat, and in the next few months I will be putting the permanent, the multi-stakeholders working group and the permanent secretariat to making sure that our extractive industries are transparent. So this audit is there. So therefore, I'd like to urge all companies who are supposed to be paying tax, not to evade tax, not to delay tax, but to pay it efficiently on time, because now I see the industries and the government, we've got to work together. But I thank the extractive industry for the work that they've done in this country, for the investment confidence that they've had in investing in Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is a great place to invest, but let's work together so both the investment and the state and the people of this country benefit the way we all should benefit.
Thank you, Minister. Now, with Octedi and Oil Search being the biggest or contributing a bulk of that tax revenue, why do you think the other players aren't paying as much tax?
There could be many reasons that they probably are not paying, but some of those probably I could have answered indirectly in the answers, the points that I made earlier. Some probably see their costs are so high compared to the income they make. Others, because of the tax holiday we've given them, like the Ramu Nickel. Ramu Nickel was brought on board at a time when there was desperate need for investors in Papua New Guinea. And there are other areas that are concerned areas where the investors may have failed to pay what they're supposed to pay or delayed payments, and which I think I have confidence and trust in the resource sector, and those who have failed or who have delayed payment will pay. Those who have not made profits, I think they will make profits, and I'm seeing us doing that. And there could be many other factors may have affected their profitability and their position in making payments or making income or contributing income to the state. But I'm seeing the situation improving down the line. But let me make this also clear. I'm also very mindful of the fact that the prices of commodities have fallen. As against my projections in the budget, 2013 budget, the copper price has fallen, the gold price has fallen, and silver price also probably has fallen, and oil is certainly somewhere there. But what I'm saying is that we're performing as an economy quite strongly in the other areas of income, like personal income, GST, company income. That is quite stronger than the projected income that we envisaged for this time of the year, and we are doing well, and that's probably balancing out. And I'm mindful of that. The resource sector will be hit. For instance, I'm seeing in my budget a 270 million kina approximate a downturn in export revenue that would have resulted had the prices remained at the projected prices that we envisaged in the budget. But because the prices have fallen, we'll be losing so much money. And I also can see the companies will be, the mining companies will also have some challenges in that area as well, and I sympathize with them. But we hope that the gold and copper and the other commodity prices improve so that we see the level of income to the operators in the country will also benefit, and that in turn will also benefit the state in the state earning its export revenue. But I'm mindful of that. But being mindful of that, I also say that there should not be an excuse for those who did not pay taxes to pay up the tax that is outstanding, or that they forgot to pay and needs to be paid.
Minister, we thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Ania, once again for asking me very important questions with regards to the resource sector of Papua New Guinea. So the most important thing is that now the Honorable Leone government is more focused in converting the proceeds of the extractive industry into agriculture and tourism and infrastructure. We like to create a resilient economy. We like to compete with the rest of the world, and especially within the region. Papua New Guinea will not continue to be a beggar. We do not want to be a recipient of aid from our friends and our neighbors. Once we thank them, we'll have to now say we're taking the lead to creating a sound economy for our people. And a way to do is to turn the extractive industry proceeds into tangible agriculture programs and agriculture industry, into tourism industry, into infrastructure industry. And most importantly, we'll tend it to developing the human resource of Papua New Guinea. We like to improve our universities to the international standard. We like to upgrade the standards of all excellence of education down to the elementary level, where Papua New Guinean children are imparted the knowledge at par with the international standard right across the world. So that when our people come up, they will be the ones to carry the extractive industry, the agriculture sector, the tourism, infrastructure, social services, power and water, and all those other areas. Our children will carry Papua New Guinea to the next level. And our focus must be in those areas: human resource development, agriculture, tourism, and the other areas that we have lacked development and progress.
A company pioneering in coal exploration and production in PNG, that's coming up next. Thanks for staying with us. Coal is one of the world's largest sources of fuel. It has the potential to bring in just as much revenue as gold and copper. The downside in PNG is that coal deposits have never been extensively explored. Waterford PNG, a company dedicated to developing a viable coal industry in the country, conducted coal explorations towards PNG's western border in 2010. Waterford has now approached Mineral Resources Authority to undertake a study of coal's potential economic benefit to the country. We now join Duncan Hardy to find out more about the company and its presence in PNG. Hello viewers, I have with me in the studio Duncan Hardy of Waterford. Duncan, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Hello.
Can you give us a background of Waterford as a company in general?
Waterford's a private PNG registered company. It has 5 shareholders, of which I'm one of them. We first came to PNG in 2010 and did some initial investigations into reports of coal within the island. And following a number of discussions with the MRA, we all agreed that we would undertake to carry out what we thought would be a 2-year study into what we call the coal potential of PNG.
Many people will be surprised to hear that there is potential for discovery of coal in PNG. Why is it that your company chose to pioneer in this area?
Well, one of our directors and shareholders was a geologist on a drilling rig in the Western Provinces, and she noticed in the early drilling of a conventional petroleum well, or wells, because they drilled 2 in the same area, they went through coal deposits at around 400 and 500 metres, and she stored that in her memory cells and put 2 and 2 together. She knew that I was quite involved in the coal industry in both Australia and New Zealand, sat down and convinced me to come on up here and have a look at whether the coal was here. In the first instance, we went into the MRA library, which is quite a good, efficient library, and we punched in coal, and we came up with a number of copies of early patrol reports. Now, the British had a lot of patrols through the region in the early 1900s, and some of these reports went back to 1890, and they spanned the period from, say, 1890 through to 1930. And you have to remember that back in that era, coal was very important to the world, and particularly to the British, because coal-fired battleships at that stage. So, and it wasn't possible or practical for a battleship to head off from England carrying its own coal, because they needed to be refuelled every 5 to 7 days. So wherever the British went, they searched for coal, local coal deposits. So we got all these reports, and some of them were rather detailed, and you have to respect the early British geologists and surveyors. And they measured a lot of these seams, you know, and they would say, well, they were 4 foot 7/8 inches thick, and they were dipping at 23 degrees, and it was so wide. And they, in some instances, took samples back to England, had them analysed. So we got about 30 very specific reports of coal, mainly in the Gulf region. So that gave us enough background to work out that, yes, there was coal, surface coal outcrops, which is the first thing you look for in coal exploration.
Ah, okay. With today's depressed coal prices and the cost structures that exist in PNG today, compared to Indonesia and other low-cost coal-producing countries, is coal production viable here in PNG?
Well, I wish I could answer that, but what we have, well, we're coming to the conclusion that, yes, there are coal deposits here. Well, we know there are coal deposits here. They're more evident in the Gulf region than in Western provinces and other areas in PNG. As to the economics of them, it's still too early, but the coals we are finding tend to be the lower grade steaming coals, very similar to the Indonesian steaming coals, which they are currently exporting. And we should be aware that Indonesia is currently the world's largest coal exporter by tonnage. Australia is still the largest exporter by dollar value. But exporting low-grade, cheaper coals it's challenging at the moment with today's prices. So the jury's still out whether there's going to be an economical coal industry here. But time will tell. I'd be hopeful that, yes, there will be. And I guess we'll have a far better idea over the next 12 months, because we're putting more focus on now the economics and particularly the landform and how we would actually export the coal. Or there may also be a local demand for coal-fired power station, or a cement works or whatever.
So viability is heavily dependent on the economic climate.
Yes. And if we look back at if we were having this interview 2 years ago, I probably would have been far more bullish, because obviously coal prices, like most commodities, have fallen in the last 2 years. You know, I think coal prices have come off, you know, upwards of 40% from where they were 2 years ago.
The Mineral Resource Authority is looking into diversification. What support have they given to Waterford?
Well, they've been very supportive. From the first time we went in there, the then director, Kepis Wally, he recognised that yes, if there's coal here, we should be looking at it. At that stage, the MRA was quite focused on trying to diversify into particularly the underwater mining, which they still are. So they've given us and the current minister and the previous ministers all the support that we've asked for. So I have to say, some of their staff have been superb, actually.
We understand that there are sizable coal deposits in West Papua. Does this mean there is good potential for PNG, considering both are similar in geology and in discovery of gold and copper?
Yes, well, if we look at the regional coal map, which, you know, and we call the regional coal map the top half of Australia, Indonesia, running through to PNG, which encompasses West Papua. There's bands of coal run right through here, and there's no reason why the coal should stop at the border. It obviously doesn't stop at the border. So if you look at the coal regions in the world, once you've got coal in a location, it's generally quite widespread through that region. So yes, there is consistency. Across the border, there are now some producing mines, particularly further west, where there's good access, because coal is a commodity market. It's bulk commodities, so you do need good access. And in particularly the western portions of West Papuan, they've got good harbours close to where the coal deposits are, so they're pushing on with those.
Duncan, you've brought in a sample of coal. Can you explain how that differs to minerals?
Yes. You have to realise that coal is not a mineral. Coal derives from vegetable matter, and most people, even in coal-producing countries like Australia, become confused about where coal comes from. But whereas the coppers and the golds and the other hard rock minerals, they've originated from deep within the centre of the earth, and for whatever reason, a volcano or whatever has brought them to the surface. Coal was laid down in forests, of dying forests or dead vegetable matter from 20 to 200 million years ago. The forests grew, and of course they would die and they would lay down. Often that material finished up off the mountain slopes down onto the flats, into the marshes of the rivers or the river flats. And over years they got buried and covered by sandstones and silts and whatever. And some of that vegetable matter turned into oil, some into gas, some into coal, and some into tar sands and the likes, or bitumens. So it depended on the depth of burial, the pressures, the time of how the eventual form. So, and if we look at this coal sample here, it's very crumbly. It's admittedly this has been exposed for a couple of months, and if you look closely enough, you'll see the remnants under a microscope of the original vegetable matter.
We continue with Waterford after the break. Welcome back. We continue our interview with Waterford and further discuss the potential for coal production in Papua New Guinea. From your work to date, could you tell us which are the most promising areas of coal and what is their likely potential?
Well, to date, we have established that there's a band of coal starts off very close to the coast in the Gulf region, arches around, heading in a northwest direction up through the western provinces, right through to the PNG Indonesian border. Now, with the background work, particularly seismic, old petroleum bores, where we've in many cases now got the coal samples out of the bores and had those out, in some cases had them analysed, we're able to work out, well, we know its surface is here, and we know that the coal was back in that petroleum bore at 200 metres, and back further to the southeast it's 500 metres. Then we can start tracking the coal on the seismic lines, and you can start building up a geological model of where the coal is. There are a number of constraints. Every time a volcano pops up, it of course distorts the local geology, and particularly we've got Mount Vesavi in the middle, which is a relatively recent volcano, and it was a big volcano, so it's distorted the immediate regional geology. So we've now mapped where we believe the coal lies. We also know that the coals are geologically need to be above the Daru limestone, so where the Daru limestones have surfaced, there'll be no coal above that. So we've built up a quite extensive geological model of how we see the coals lying through that area. There are also signs of coal in the Wewak Valley and some of the more northern areas, but not at the same scale as there is in the western provinces and particularly the Gulf region.
Is Waterford mainly participating in the discovery of lower grade thermal coal, or is there some potential for higher quality metallurgical coal needed by the steel industry? Is there some possibility of discovering coal bed methane?
Well, in the first instance, we perhaps thought that PNG was more suited for coal bed methane, or CBM as it's known, in that the early petroleum wells were indicating some quite large deposits of coal in the western provinces at the right depth, you know, from 400 to 800 metres. And indeed, that resource is there, and one day I suspect that it will be commercialised in some form. But of course that takes a very expensive drilling program and also a large capital cost to develop it. And I suspect that that's at some day in the future those deposits will be commercialised. I guess we've also found, so that was promising that we've found those. Now whether it's Waterford or whether it's a future company at some stage in years to come exploits those, we don't know. But in the first instance, we're more now focused on the easier option, which is to capitalise on the surface handy deposits in the Gulf. So that's where we're really focusing from here on. And the answer to about coke and coal, yes, we've had quite a large range of coal samples, particularly as we get further inland, and as the coal gets closer to the upthrust of the highlands, there are indications there of higher grade coals. I won't go as far as saying they're coking coals, but they're certainly having a higher energy value than the typical steaming coals.
What is Waterford's proposed budget and plans for coal exploration in PNG in the coming years?
Well, in the first instance, we are in the final process of completing our coal potential study of PNG as part of our work commitment for the MRA. Now we hope to have that completed by December of this year and hand the entire data sets over to the MRA so that they have open access to all the studies that we have put together. And I have to say this is a very substantial database which we've put together over the last 3 years. As to date, most of our time has been spent on desktop studies of old data, and it's quite interesting sourcing the data. We went back as far as we managed to access data in London Mineral Museums and Dunedin, Otago University, and so it went on. So it's a vast data collection which we'll be handing over to the MRA. We are now starting to, we'll be putting in land liaison officers on the ground. We've just employed a permanent young lady to start doing the groundwork. And that we need to understand the infrastructure, how good the roads are, how deep the rivers are. So we'll be doing that quietly over the next 12 months. And at that stage, we'll be putting proper exploration teams on the ground to do preliminary drilling. One of the issues we have is that, and this isn't a criticism of the MRA, is that when the Mining Act was written in 1992, there was virtually no provision for coal mining, and that raises a whole number of issues which the MRA are currently addressing in the review of the Mining Act, and there will be a specific section referring to coal. So it's very difficult for us to say we're going to be mining when there's no provision for us to go coal mining. And that raises a whole lot of questions. You know, can we go and get a bulk sample, for example, which is something quite common in the coal industry, and a bulk sample is 10,000 tonnes. So there's no provision for royalties. Now, I'd like to think there were no royalties, but the reality is that probably there will be a royalty, and these need to be not only finalised but then also passed through Parliament. So there are a number of blocks we have before we can actually get to talk about a coal mining industry. Running tandem with that, of course, we're doing early work on the economics of how an industry may look.
Duncan, what is your opinion of the high cost structure in PNG?
Well, it's not helpful, but we have to accept that PNG does have a high cost structure, which hopefully will lower as some of the pressure points come off the PNG construction industry. At the moment, it's certainly working against our economics, but just as rents, property rents have come down over the last 3 or 4 months, one would hope that a lot of the contracting rates, boat hire, helicopter hire and heavy machinery hire rates will fall down, because they are a considerable cost in the coal industry. And we, at the end of the day, have to compete against lower cost nations like Indonesia, who also have the advantage of having 20 years of refining coal mining. So these are the odds that we have to, are working against. But where there's large slabs of energy anywhere in the world, there's always focus on how do you manage to capitalise them in some form. And it does appear that there is a large slab of coal energy sitting in the Gulf region. So we've got probably the next 18 months of trying to work through those issues I've just talked about.
So having just said that, realistically, in your opinion, when do you see PNG having a surface coal industry?
We're going to need to have legislation to be able to work within, but even putting the legislation to one side, it would be possible to have the first sample, bulk samples going out within 24 months. And from there you establish a market. So you could say in that 3 to 5 year period, you could actually have an export industry within PNG.
Thank you, Duncan. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Well, thank you.
That ends another edition of Resourc PNG. For any comments or queries, do email us on this address, resourcepng@mtv.com.pg. Or to find out more, check MTV online. That's www.mtv.com.pg, and go to our Resourc PNG page, or you can check our page on Facebook. Until another edition of Resourc PNG, have a pleasant evening.